Welcome to the Project Censored Show on Pacifica Radio. I'm Mickey Huff with Eleanor Goldfield. We are welcoming back to the program today Jeff Cohen, certainly no stranger to the Project Censored audience. Jeff, as you all know, was founder of the amazing organization Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, fair.org, that did Extra Magazine. Also, they have Counterspin, the great program that airs here on Pacifica. Jeff also is a co-founder of rootsaction.org, and he was the founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media, where I now am over at Ithaca College. Jeff also is the author of Cable News Confidential. He wrote a book about his time as senior producer for Phil Donahue. It was a book about Jeff's misadventures in cable news, and we've talked about that with him before on the show. Today, however, we're bringing Jeff Cohen back for some sad reasons, but also, I think, celebratory reasons for the world of independent media. This past year, we did lose Phil Donahue. We very recently also lost the great towering media scholar, Robert McChesney, so influential and important in the media reform movement and independent media world. And just very recently, we also lost Bill Moyers. And Bill Moyers was, going back to the Lyndon Johnson administration, but was really a mainstay in public broadcasting for many, many years, and including did some very daring documentary coverage of Iran-Contra in 1987. The Secret Government is a documentary I still show in my college classes. And of course, Bill was a big champion of independent media. And I think a lot of people maybe don't know how much Bill Moyers was part of the independent media ecosystem. And again, I couldn't think of anybody better to talk to than somebody that's really just himself not only lived that history, but been such an extraordinary and influential proponent of independent media. Jeff Cohen, welcome back to the Project Censored Show.
It's great to be with you, Mickey. It's always great to be associated with Project Censored.
So Jeff, you have worked alongside so many of these folks, and it's sad when we see, the end of life for so many people that were so crucial. But we're here today too to celebrate some of the really amazing things that went on. And Bill Moyers passed recently at 91. Tell us a little bit about, maybe tell us some things that the people might not really know about how instrumental Bill Moyers was in the indie media ecosystem.
Yeah, what people know is that Bill Moyers was perhaps the most important television journalist of his era, on public TV. What they may not know, and by the way, he made one of the great documentaries of media criticism in 2007 called Buying the War, How Big Media Failed Us, about the Iraq invasion. But yes, Bill played a huge role with independent media. He was supportive of us. He was, for a while, the president of the Schumann Center for Media and Democracy that funded so many groups. He gave support to truthout.org, commondreams.org. He was a big supporter of the media reform group that Bob McChesney co-founded called Free Press. You can find them at freepress.net. We had huge national conferences of media activists, independent media producers. Thousands of people would gather in various places. And Bill Moyers and the Schumann Center were funding a lot of that, including those conferences. And I've got to say, Bill Moyers' role with fair.org, with FAIR, when I was the leader, he was such an inspiring supporter. He couldn't actually, say so publicly, but when FAIR did its studies of who gets on public TV and who does not get on public TV's news hour, Bill Moyers was just utterly thrilled by what we had done and kept encouraging us to do more. And one of the great aspects of Bill was his ability to help us get funds. And he would see things that FAIR had published. And I remember him calling me. This is one of my favorite Bill Moyers stories of all time. we had done an article about how NPR in the 90s was putting on what they called debates about healthcare reform. And it was a former Republican Congress member and a former Democratic Congress member. And in their alleged debates, they would both out of hand dismiss single payer, government provided, nonprofit health insurance, universal health care, what we now call Medicare for all. Just dismissed it, both of them, the Democrat and the Republican formers. What we weren't told, and FAIR published this, is that both of these former Congress members were currently lobbyists or consultants for for-profit healthcare interests. If they had identified, if NPR had identified their two former Congress members accurately, people would have understood, oh, I get it. They're both for corporate health care. That's why they don't want single payer nonprofit health insurance. All right. So Bill Moyer sees this in FAIR's publication and says, what was the reaction? And I said, we had no reaction. And he said, well, what would happen if I could get you guys the money? It was $18,000 to buy a quarter page of the New York Times op-ed page, which was prime real estate. Everyone read that page. And, Mobil Corporation, the fossil fuel company, it used to be called the mobile corner of the op-ed page. And, it was generally corporate propaganda.
Yeah.
But so Bill finds us the money. We published this embarrassing thing that NPR is misleading its listeners. And by about 10 in the morning, I had heard from 3 different executives at NPR because Bill Moyers had helped us say what FAIR was saying week after week about corporate media bias and censorship. But we said it in a place that everyone in the mainstream media saw. So all of a sudden we got a response from NPR, and it was thanks to Bill Moyers.
Yeah. Very important. Again, that's the kind of thing that people often don't realize that and of course there's people that'll, always want to criticize and have the perfect be the enemy of the good and nitpick with people. But I think that some of these stories about people like Bill, like your time with Phil Donahue, these are stories I think people really need to know if they're going to be more critically media literate about the news ecosystem, how it really functions and who it functions for. Even though there's this amazing work that's going on, it takes somebody that's an astute muckraking style journalist like Bill Moyers to go back. And he wasn't just interested in his own career. He was shining the light down on everybody else that was doing this great work.
Yes, I think that's the key for your listeners who are pretty sophisticated to understand. There's often these mavericks operating in mainstream media, but they get beaten down. Phil Donahue was one of the few who won out, and in the 1960s was featuring gay rights, women's rights, labor rights, consumer rights on a daytime show to millions of viewers. And he was always fighting with management. And I tell the story of what happened to us when we were all terminated at MSNBC for trying to ask questions in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. Bill Moyers was another one of these figures. He went over to CBS. He was there in the early 80s, and it was awful for him. He didn't get enough airtime. He didn't do, he was always in fights with management. And that's when he comes over to public TV. And in the public TV, which is just as timid as CBS News, the difference is that at public TV, he could do his own fundraising.
Yeah.
And if he brought in his own money, that gave him a certain amount of freedom. And so he did these great documentaries. You mentioned the great one about Iran-Contra called The Secret Government. And then, go 20 years, that was 1987.
Yeah.
Go 20 years later, and he does the one about the Iraq War, buying the war, how big media failed us. So he was able to achieve things at public TV that he would put people on the air on public TV, Naomi Klein, Bob McChesney, who co-founded Free Press, the great media scholar, Jim Hightower, the fighting populist. He had Noam Chomsky on for 45 minutes on public television.
That's unheard of.
Unheard of, except for Bill Moyers.
Right.
When we would do these studies of how the McNeil-era News Hour, now called the PBS News Hour, how they excluded all of these individuals, how they had a corporate General Electric to General Motors spectrum, a center-right spectrum, Bill Moyers would encourage us, can you do another study? Can you stay on them?
Yeah.
And here he was, perhaps the biggest figure at PBS, asking us at FAIR to do more scrutiny of why on the nightly news hour they are not including these individuals that Bill Moyers on his shows did bring to us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an extraordinary space, and it's interesting because I mean, the media ecosystem is, well, as much as it changes, it remains the same in terms of bias and censorship and who's platformed and who's not and so on. But in that space, the so-called mainstream that is the corporate space, and in that space, let's include PBS, NPR, because much of that underwriting funding comes from the private sector, not the government, right? And even though they're also now under assault. But where is the Bill Moyers today? Like, I mean,
it's John, they're comedians.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the difference.
John Oliver. Yeah.
It's John Oliver. It's, Jon Stewart. It's the
Yeah.
people on The Daily Show. But I mean, John Oliver does investigative comedy,
Yes.
investigative journalism with jokes.
Yes.
But prior to John Oliver, it was Bill Moyers. If someone had a breakthrough on mainstream TV, it was Moyers. And I want to say something about the history of public television, which is really crucial for your audience. Bill Moyers left the Lyndon Johnson administration in 1966. The general sense is he was just frustrated by the escalation of the Vietnam War. And Bill was a populist. He was born so poor. He identified with working people and the poor and thought that's the role of government. So he leaves Johnson at 66. But the Carnegie Commission, the blue ribbon panel that was trying to devise what would public television be, and then back then they would often call it educational television. They came out with this study, and Bill worked on it. And they came out with a report. Here's how we should set up public broadcasting, public television. And remember, all over Europe, they already had this. And in most European countries, public television are the dominant channels. In our country, it didn't exist. It was so. The Carnegie Commission comes up with this idea, and it recommends that for public television to be independent, the way public broadcasting should be funded was a tiny tax on every television set. That's sort of how they'd done it at the BBC in England. And it would be like a 2%, 3% tax, I think, on your purchase of a television set. And it would be millions of dollars that would go to public television because there were millions of television sets.
Yeah.
And by the time Johnson's proposing it to Congress, one of the Southern Dixiecrats, and Moyers has talked about this, I think Moyers almost witnessed it or heard about it the minute it happened. The Dixiecrat senator says, wait a second, there's going to be independent funding. It's going to go automatically to public television. No, we want to appropriate it every year. And because of that day, it's why public broadcasting to this day is so timid.
Yeah.
If you don't have automatic funding that the politicians can't cut off if they're unhappy with your coverage, you are beholden to these powerful politicians. And as you said, Mickey, now the Republicans are trying to exit out to zero. But think about in other countries where public television, where a Bill Moyers wouldn't bristle. Bill Moyers in any other country would have been just the star of public broadcasting, would have had no problem with public broadcasting management. In our country, he had to raise his own funds and fight for airtime. But in other countries, the Bill Moyers, everyone wants to work at public broadcasting because they have independent funding and it's big
Yeah.
funding. Let me give you the figures.
Yeah.
Norway, for each person per capita taxpayer funding that goes to public broadcasting per person in Norway, $180 a year. Germany, $120 a year. UK, $100 a year. That's largely BBC. Japan, France, $70. Canada is way down there at $33. That's largely the CBC. How much money per person, tax money, goes to our public broadcasting? It's between $3 or $4 per person.
Yeah.
So, and what goes into that vacuum is, as you said, corporate sponsorship, but that's impolite. We're supposed to call it corporate underwriting.
Yeah.
But that's how corporations have exercised influence toward timidity, even on alleged public TV and public radio. Bill Moyers was there at the beginning. He knows that that senator said, no, we want to appropriate it every year. We don't want automatic, insulated, independent funding going to public broadcasting. And we've paid the cost ever since.
We surely have, Jeff. And, you know, there's a 1.1 billion they're trying to cut for the next couple of years. And I mean, again, and just as you said earlier, we're all critics. We've been critics of NPR and PBS coverage, particularly foreign policy, wars, and so on. Bill Moyer really was a standout. You know, he was kind of a shining star over there in terms of public interest muckraking journalism. And it would be great to see more of that. But even the amount of money that we're seeing, it's going to be taken away possibly. So it's gonna make worse an already bad situation for public media in this country. And it's going to be people in some of the poorest places and more remote places that really rely on some of these things for education and so on that are going to suffer the most.
A lot of places, they don't have Pacifica radio or community radio stations.
Right.
So all they have is NPR.
Yeah.
And NPR, as people know, is afflicted by this both sidesism often, where you have to put the official lie. Even you're a good reporter at NPR, you've done your work, you know what the truth is, but you always have to balance the truth with the official lie from the government. That's something Bill Moyers hated.
Yeah.
It's something he bristled at CBS when he was there in the 80s. And by the way, talking about both sidesism, let me see if I can find the quote. I don't think I have it, but I could approximate it.
Yeah.
In the New York Times obituary.
Yes.
For Bill Moyers. It's something they did to historian Howard Zinn. It's something they did to media scholar Bob McChesney in his New York Times obituary. They felt the need to quote the main, probably the most important reincarnation of the red baiting senator, Joe McCarthy. And that's this guy who just passed away, David Horowitz, and he had something called Frontline Magazine.
Yes.
So it quotes the New York Times obituary of Bill Moyers, this legendary figure, beloved by everyone who worked with him, beloved by millions of TV viewers. They have a quote, but Frontline Magazine said about him that he was a sweater-wearing spouter of Marxist propaganda with a soft Texas accent. Why the need to put, again, it's this both sidesism where you feel the need to balance something that needs no balance, especially from a crazy. I mean, I had some criticisms of Bill Moyers that was informed. It wasn't just calling him a commie. But the New York Times feels the need. They did it to Zinn. They did it to McChesney. And now they've done it to Bill Moyers, quoting like a Joe McCarthyite for balance. It's just stupid. It's not journalism. It's stupid.
It's unfortunate that they feel the need to continuously do that. And particularly in the case of Horowitz and Front Page Mag.
Hey, did I mention, and you know, we've passed the torch to you, Mickey, at the Park Center for Independent Media, and now you lead the Izzy Awards for independent media, named after I.F. Stone.
Right.
Well, when we had our first Izzy Award, Bill Moyers did his show, the Bill Moyers Journal on PBS, about the Izzy Award.
Yeah,
And he
incredible.
talked about Izzy. He quoted Izzy's wonderful son who helped us launch the award, Jeremy Stone. And then he had full interview with the two winners of the first Izzy Award, Amy Goodman and Glenn Greenwald. So it's just typical how there's like PBS, and then here's what Bill Moyers is doing on PBS.
Yeah. Yeah, we need more people like this, and I think it's important to celebrate the contributions and the good things that they did. And speaking of timidity, just probably should get this in just quickly. What we're seeing now is attacks on not just independent media or nonprofits, which we're definitely seeing going on with McCarthyite-like smears regarding anti-Semitism for people criticizing Israeli policy in Gaza and so forth. But we're also seeing full-scale attacks on the legacy media. ABC, CBS just capitulated for Paramount because they have legal cases pending that they want, and they're playing the quid pro quo game.
It's exactly why a guy like Bill Moyers can't operate in commercial television. I mean, Paramount owns CBS News.
Yeah.
They were interfering with 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes, Paramount management was, because Trump had sued. It was a frivolous suit. There's not a lawyer in the country that believes that Trump would have prevailed. It was about how CBS edited their interview with Kamala Harris. It was a nut job suit. It couldn't win. But when he sues big media, it gives these big media owners a chance to give Trump bribes that are legal. So Paramount has just settled this frivolous suit that they could not possibly lose. I think it was $18 million. And because of that bribe, and of course, two people have left 60 Minutes, the executive producer and then the executive producer's boss, a woman who was the head of CBS News. So Trump got the money he wanted in the form of a legal settlement. He got people to leave CBS News. And now the Trump administration will approve the Paramount merger with, what is it called, Skydance Media. And on the day that the merger goes through, Sherry Redstone, who was interfering with 60 Minutes, is the owner of Paramount. She will be nearly $2 billion richer than she is today. Now, the Project Censored audience knows that corporate media is utterly corrupt, and it's never been more corrupt than today, where you have journalists being sold out by owners who are just cozying up to this authoritarian president, Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's dire times, Jeff. And as you know, we need powerful, independent media, really. I mean, it's a cliche to say more than ever, but just as always, we really need it, exemplified by the people that we cover at Project Censored, the winners of the Izzy Award that we did at late April that you were there for, with the great Victor Pickard, of course, giving homage to Bob McChesney. We really need these kind of organizations now. We really need to support a Movement Media Alliance. And I know, as odd as it feels sometimes, we need to speak out against the attacks against legacy media. Even though we criticize them, they should not be capitulating and handing things over the way that they are. We still need them as platforms to try to tell people what's going on. But it's definitely an uphill battle, Jeff.
Yeah, and I'm glad we did this segment, Mickey, because a lot of people think of Bill Moyers as, well, he did these pretty unusual things on public TV. They do not know the role he played for all of us in independent media, for FAIR, for Truth Out, for Common Dreams, for Democracy Now! You know, he was connected to this funding platform that's unfortunately now defunct, the Schuman Center for Media and Democracy. And crucial, another thing that Bill got us the funds for, we put out this book about Rush Limbaugh called
Reign of Error.
Yeah, FAIR did this, Rush Limbaugh's Reign of Error.
Yeah, was that Peter Hart?
No, it was Steve Rendell, Jim Marikas, and myself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have the book on the shelf.
Yeah, published by New Press, but it was a FAIR book. And thanks to Bill, we took out a full-page ad in USA Today, and we had pictures of these four huge stars in mainstream media that were praising Rush Limbaugh. And I think the headline of our big ad was, "They praise Limbaugh, we bury him." And
Yes.
in a full-page ad, we could list, yeah, I don't know, 8, 10, 15 of Limbaugh's continuous lies and distortions with our rebuttals. So you didn't even have to buy our book. You could read the full-page ad. And Bill Moyers and his son, John Moyers, who also worked with Schumann Center. I mean, we were able to, the goal of FAIR from the beginning was to take the Chomsky, Alex Coburn, Ed Herman critique of mainstream media, Ben Bagdikian, and take it into the mainstream media.
Yeah.
We wanted to take this critique under the noses of mainstream journalists. And Bill Moyers helped us take a lot of our FAIR's critique of the corporate media into the corporate media in the form of these paid ads.
Yeah, that's certainly a way to get into that system. You have to sort of pay to play, but then you're in the public eye. And like you mentioned with the bit before on the op-ed page for the New York Times, so many people saw that would never otherwise see it.
Yeah, and that was how we started with Bill, is he was helping us raise the money. I think it was $18,000 for these quarter-page ads in the New York Times. And that day, our phones would be ringing because everyone saw a critique of the mainstream media in the mainstream media. And it wasn't just out in the Nation magazine or a book by Chomsky and Herman.
Right.
That was the goal of FAIR. And I've got to say, Bill Moyers played a huge role in helping FAIR realize that goal. Now, FAIR uses social media to get, out there in a very effective way. And that's fair.org.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing at Project Censored, including with infographics, just different ways, clips like this, where we can put shorter bits up on social media. We're really trying to meet people where they are, and our way at Project Censored of doing something similar, not with ads, but it's through education and critical media literacy, news education, that we're really trying to get into schools. We're trying to get in front of people about the importance of understanding how media operate, who owns it, who it functions for and doesn't. That's sort of our kind of Trojan horse way of getting into that mix, is just media literacy is for everyone, and I think just the existence of independent media itself is a lesson that if you juxtapose what's going on any given day in the New York Times or the Washington Post or cable news, and you take a look at Democracy Now, or you take a look at some of these other independent outlets, you can see right away what is and isn't covered. It's almost an immediate lesson. And I do it to students every semester, right?
Yeah.
We just pull the websites up and I'm like, what do you see? What's missing here?
That's great. I remember running into people in the 80s and 90s who said, wow, I've been reading FAIR's magazine and now I've canceled my subscription to the New York Times. And we would tell them, don't.
Yeah.
Keep reading the New York Times and look at independent media so you'll know what the New York Times is missing, where their biases are, what they're censoring. And, it's important for people, as you say, and you're such a pioneer in media literacy, you got to compare this to that.
Yeah.
You got to compare, here's what a corporate outlet did, and here's what an outlet did that doesn't have corporate ownership and doesn't take corporate sponsorship. We're recording right after the incredible, stunning victory of Zoran Mamdani in New York. He wasn't just attacked by the New York Post. He was attacked by the New York Times.
Yeah.
The New York Times said a year ago or so that they were no longer going to endorse in local races. And then the Mamdani upsurge forced them to write an editorial. It was basically an attack on Mamdani. It was an anti-endorsement. It was he's uniquely unfit to be mayor. And one of the funniest lines in there is, this is something the New York Times does a lot. Many New Yorkers, this is in the Times editorial.
Some people say.
Yeah. Many New Yorkers are understandably disappointed by the Democratic field. Well, within a week or two, that had been refuted because there was this huge voter turnout
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it was a few New Yorkers were upset by the field, the 12 or so editorial board members of the New York Times.
Yeah.
But if you were under 35 or 40 in New York, you were pretty excited by the field of candidates. And so, I mean, Mamdani wasn't just attacked by the right-wing New York Post. He was attacked by the corporate centrist New York Times, and people didn't buy it.
Well, which is a good thing, but this is the pattern we've seen for years. I mean, going back to 2016, the corporate media buried Bernie Sanders, and they purposely either wouldn't cover him. I remember the Washington Post ran 14 pieces in like a 12 or 18 hour span.
No,
What's
that? It's sick. It was a fair article by Adam Johnson.
Okay.
16 negative stories about Bernie in 16 hours.
Yeah. It was like on the clock. Yeah.
Prior to the internet.
Yeah.
A daily newspaper could attack you once or twice or three times a day. But with the internet, and the interesting thing is, if you look at that article, and Bernie sometimes would wave it at his stump speeches, look at that article and you see, and that's why I think the New York Times editorial attacking Mamdani looks laughable after the election.
Yeah.
But look at the article where they were saying Bernie did lousy at the debate with Hillary in Michigan. He doesn't know how to talk to Black people. That's going to hurt him in Michigan. He won the Michigan primary. He upset Hillary Clinton. So they were attacking him hour after hour. And because of independent media and grassroots organizing, you can sometimes, not always, but you can sometimes defeat the bias of corporate media.
Yeah, well, it's pervasive and it's real, and you've certainly been criticizing it, chronicling it, and doing something about it to counter it for a very, very long time, Jeff Cohen. And it's an honor to have you back on the Project Censored show, especially here as we were talking about the late, great Bill Moyer, who passed just recently at 91. Jeff, anything you'd like to add here last as we wrap up this segment? I know you mentioned rootsaction.org that you're very involved with Norman Solomon and others. Of course, fair.org. Anything else you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Project Censored is such an important project. If people are tuned in to Project Censored, they should also join fair.org and get on their email list. And then when you criticize mainstream media and you do it collectively, you're more effective. And so FAIR has been very effective at mobilizing people to write individual letters to emails to New York Times, and they give you the talking points that you might need. So Project Censored and fair.org are twinned in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff Cohen, again, always a delight to catch up with you. Thanks.
One other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Just real fast.
Go ahead.
You're the director now of the Park Center for Independent Media.
Yeah.
I was the founding director. That was set up by the Park Foundation. The wonderful Adelaide Park Gomer is the president of that foundation. And Adelaide will be the first to tell you how important the advice of Bill Moyers was when she was funding independent media outlets.
Yeah.
Bill Moyers was a mentor to Adelaide Park Gomer. They were very, very close. I got an email when Bill passed. Bill was influential with people that had the resources, that here's how we can build up independent media, because independent media don't have big advertising budgets.
No.
They need funding from their base and from foundations. And Bill played that kind of role, including the advice he would often give to the Park Foundation. And
getting into the educational sphere, right? And I think that that's a very integral component of really educating people about the importance of a free and vibrant press, including through independent media. And that's exactly what I think the Park Center was set up to do. And it's an honor to be here in your footsteps, Jeff. So kudos to you for all you've done for indie media over the years.